For me, sports diplomacy is about making friends through sport. So it's just a natural progression from being involved in sport. I think it's the one area of our lives that we really can cross cultural barriers. But officially, it's using sport as a diplomatic, a social, or a political tool in the global world. It's actually a subset of cultural diplomacy.
Welcome to this episode of the Katalis Podcast Season 3. I'm Sondang Sirait and I'm here with my co-host, Robbie Gaspar. Hi, Robbie.
Hi, Sondang. It's great to see you. Today, we're talking to the formidable Stephanie Brantz, which is timely given that Indonesia has just finished hosting the Under-17 Boys FIFA World Cup and will also be hosting the Under-17 Asian Cup for girls in 2024.
Now, this is a topic that's right in your corner. So tell us about your experience as a professional football player in Indonesia, Robbie.
Thanks, Sondang. I spent almost 8 years playing professionally in Indonesia and had an amazing experience where I fell in love with Indonesia. But it is now a very exciting time in sports for Indonesia and Australia, and a great opportunity to talk about sports diplomacy. Let's get started. Steph, welcome to the Katalis Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You've had an impressive 20-year career as a sports and events presenter, producer, and commentator, covering a wide range of sports. While many people know about your role as chair of DFAT Sports Diplomacy Advisory Council, Football New South Wales Deputy Chair, and your work as a football commentator and producer for Football TV. What some people might not be aware of, your close relationship with Indonesia. Could you share more about this close connection with our listeners?
Hello to all of you and hello to your listeners. What most people here, I think is that I tan really well, and I have to tell them that I'm cheating because my father is Indonesian. and so I've got a built-in tan even in winter, and I'm very proud of that heritage. He was born in Bandung and lived there until he was 10. When Indonesia gained independence, a lot of the Dutch army moved back or had to move back to Holland in the Netherlands. So he and his 3 siblings and his Indonesian mother and Dutch father moved to Den Haag in the Netherlands and grew up there, and that's where he met my mother. So I guess I can claim 25% Indonesian heritage, and I love it. I've only been a couple of times, and then one of them was for the final of the Asian Cup at the time, the one that was co-hosted with Thailand and Vietnam. Wonderful, and the vibe at the stadium was just incredible for the final, and really, really enjoyed it.
So, Steph, you are the chair of DFAT Sports Diplomacy Advisory Council, which means you're very involved in this line of work, basically. Could you explain what sports diplomacy is, and could you also elaborate on your role on the council?
Yeah, thanks, Sondang. It's an interesting one because I think of sports diplomacy, and I'll tell you the official part, but for me, sports diplomacy is about making friends through sport. So it's just a natural progression from being involved in sport. I think it's the one area of our lives that we really can cross cultural barriers. And once you're on a sporting field, you're all playing the same game and you're all speaking the language of that sport. So I think it's something that I've always really enjoyed without actually knowing it was sports diplomacy. You know, you go to an event and you meet people from other countries and you share cultural stories and just create friendships. And to me, that is innately what it's about. But I guess officially it's using sport as a diplomatic, a social, or a political tool in the global world. It's actually a subset of cultural diplomacy, and countries, as we know, have done for many years, and now it's becoming an official thing, if you like, to use culture, sports and arts to further diplomatic goals. And I think in a way enhance cross-cultural understanding. With the council, it was set up to help advise government on different aspects where sport could help as I guess we call it a soft power asset. And that could be through advising on attracting high profile international events, such as the Women's World Cup, which has recently been here in Australia. And in Indonesia, you would all be very excited about the Under-17 Men's World Cup. And that's where you bring all the countries to come and play, but also things like Olympics. And I must say that in Australia, a lot of focus is on Brisbane 2032, because of course the Olympic and Paralympic Games will be held there. And then the world really comes to play. So those events provide a platform for countries to showcase culture, to foster good relations, or sometimes even make political statements. So there's that aspect of it. There's a peace building aspect. There's tourism, so you can promote your country through people coming to visit, because it's a very nice way to celebrate your country when everyone rocks up to watch a sporting event because you put on your best face. And as I mentioned, also as a soft power tool. So I think when you talk about exerting power through economic or through military power, it's much softer and nicer to gain favour and build relationships through sport. So the council does a little bit of advising on that. I've got to say I'm the least qualified, I feel, on that council. It's full of Olympians and people that have represented at World Cups and worn the green and gold. But it's a group of people with great connections globally. And that's been really fun to help with advice and to share our networks with the federal government. One in particular was during the Women's World Cup. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Penny Wong, put on a gender equity symposium, and we were able to share our networks to get speakers and advise on topics and things like that. And it turned out to be quite fabulous. I think being a gender equity forum, there were a lot of women involved in sport and supporting sport in the room, but they had the US Secretary of State, Mr. Anthony Blinken, come in, and he didn't address there. And it was quite funny because I think he was actually the only male that actually got on stage. So, but it was a show of how powerful the pull of sport can be. And of course, they went on to have all these different bilateral talks and those sorts of meetings, but sport was the catalyst to bring everyone together. So I like to think it's the fun side of politics. Oh,
that's very powerful and really exciting role that you play.
Well, it's super fun. It means you get to go and see a lot of places. It's quite exciting. I mentioned coming to Indonesia for the final of the Asian Cup, which feels like forever ago. And I very much enjoyed that, but I was there in a role as media, and I've worked in world feed media, if you like, the organisations that do the feed to the rest of the world. I've worked in that for quite a few years, and particularly with FIFA, it means you go to any one of 200 plus countries, which has been really exciting and fun. And I've just loved being able to make friends with people around the world.
Something you have in common with Robbie. Robbie's also in this area of sports diplomacy.
Robbie's very powerful in this area, and he's actually played there. So he has the power in this in this field.
We've been talking about it for a long time, Steph, as well, the power of sports diplomacy and to build those people-to-people links. And you've summed it up perfectly, so it's awesome.
Just moving on, just picking up on what you said, Steph, it has been a big year for football in Australia and for women's sport, especially with Australia hosting the biggest and probably the best Women's World Cup ever. Now, in your opinion, what has that meant for Australia and globally?
Yeah, Sonia, it's been absolutely huge. I'm not sure that people outside of football or global football perhaps realised how big a Women's World Cup could be. And yes, I agree with you. If you ask anyone in Australia, it was the best World Cup. That's naturally what they're going to say. But it was extraordinary the way the engagement, I guess you'd say, with the public picked up. And there's actually a report that's been done on it, and the Australian Sports Commission does a survey on a selection of Australians to see how it's engaged with the community. And I think there was around 45% before the tournament had said they were keen to engage. And by the end of it, there had been huge engagement. It had gone up to 70-something%. I think 75% had said they'd engaged with it personally. And as far as media coverage went, Australia had a 90% hit of media engagement. So it was huge for them. It was enormous for women's sport as well. It was sold out stadiums. There was record attendance. 2 million people went, or around 2 million people attended matches. The viewership was extraordinary, and Australia and England playing in the semi-final became the most watched TV program in Australian history. Well, since we've had ratings qualification. So it was absolutely enormous. It just swept the country. It generated 900 million in revenue, and the tournament broke even for the first time. And that's quite an achievement for a Women's World Cup.
Yes, Steph, I actually also took the Indonesian consul general here from WA to her first ever football game. We went and watched Colombia against Morocco, and she loved it. She sort of fell in love with it, and I'm going to take her to a Perth Glory game again once we sort of get a bit of time. So anyway, talking about World Cup, Steph, Indonesia recently hosted the Under-17 Boys FIFA World Cup, their first ever FIFA World Cup tournament. On top of this, both nations will also be participating in the Asian Cup in Qatar this January, marking Indonesia's return after 17 years when they hosted it. Plus, Indonesia is set to host the Under-17 Asian Cup for girls in April next year, with Australia recently qualifying for this tournament. What opportunities do these events present for enhancing the relationship between our two amazing countries?
Well, Robbie, I can first say I'm quite relieved when Australia qualifies for Youth World Cups, because it means that your pathways are actually doing something. And great to see Indonesia back at the Asian Cup in Qatar in January. That's such an amazing tournament, because I remember when it was here in Australia, how everyone really got on board with it. And I thought it's about time people realise that we have such a strong relationship with our near neighbours. And that is what's so important about attending events together, and particularly Australia being able to travel to Indonesia for that, for hopefully that Women's World Cup, which will be incredible. I think the Asian Cup for women is a tricky one, because I think there's a big gap in where all the countries are at, and we see that closing over time. But I love that in Asia we can share knowledge and we can share that experience together, and we should be doing that with our near neighbours. I think also there's a whole lot of, perhaps a laundry list of ancillary reasons why getting together on these events is so important, because we are regional neighbours. So that opportunity for dialogue. So, when the heads of country can get together at these events, either as spectators or more usually as part of official delegations in the comfy seats. But they create an informal environment where these leaders can chat together. And I think it's a much more relaxing way, or a friendlier way to discuss, I don't know, bilateral issues while you watch your team taking a free kick or something like that. So it's not as formal as say, maybe a diplomatic summit. It's also a chance to showcase cultural diplomacy. So those opening and closing ceremonies are super important. They're a cultural exhibition, and Indonesia is such a rich country culturally that it's always beautiful to see those things in an exhibition-like sphere. But there's just so many broader aspects to that. And I think that we share a lot, given we're in the same region. So we not only have the economic ties, we've got a security cooperation because we share the same concerns about security in the region. And I guess even when there's tensions in the region, we can collaborate on that and work together. But those people-to-people links are, I think, the most important. And anyone that has had those relationships with Indonesia know how warm and friendly the people are. Tourism is a big one. I know that's been somewhat, it's not been fraught recently, but I know that there's different ways of treating the tourism sphere now in Indonesia to ensure that people recognise the cultural significance. And I think that's really important, because as the Middle East is kind of opening up more to tourists, I think you've got to realise that when you go to any other country, you've got to respect the culture and the values over there. So I think that's super important. And sporting events are a great way to open people's eyes to that, because they tend to be a little bit more relaxed. So it's a very genial way, if you like, to assimilate with the culture. And I think that's what the countries can do together, those people-to-people links, the exposing of the cultures to each other, and how they can just enjoy being side by side. You might not agree on everything, but a sporting event is a perfect way to experience a culture.
And just picking up on what you just mentioned about people-to-people connections, I'm just interested. You've done so much regarding sports diplomacy. Do you think there are still things that haven't been done or could be done better in the bilateral space between Indonesia and Australia, given there are many issues that could arise at any time?
I think we could do more joint initiatives, things like collaboration on events. And I have spoken to Robbie about this in the past. I don't think that we utilise the link with the Asian Champions League enough. the fact that the clubs do come together. And I think there's more that could be done in the communities here when the teams come, and particularly when the Australian teams visit Indonesian clubs. I think there could be more of a community piece, if you like. I don't quite know how that would work, because I do a lot of work in the women's space, and until the Women's Asian Champions League gets up, then that's probably not as relevant. But things like visiting teams, coming and learning from the other players, and then sharing with them the way they train at home and how that works, and coaching, I think, conferences and those sorts of events would be really valuable. I know they're done to it to a certain extent. I think we could elevate that and really look to do things with shared objectives. Collaborative bids, I think, would be great. And I know that we had, I think, briefly looked, and I'm not sure how official it is, but we briefly looked at perhaps a collaborative bid for a men's World Cup in, remind me, Robbie, was this 2034 we're talking? I'll be long gone from the industry, but and I think that's going in a different direction. But those are the sort of things I think would be amazing, because quite frankly, with the Men's World Cup, that is becoming a juggernaut that one country can't host that anymore. So I think if it was to come to Australia, then it would need to be shared. We saw with the Women's World Cup between Australia and New Zealand that it can be done across countries and across federations. I think also the distances become less of a barrier than they have been in the past. So it's interesting. I think a really good example, and perhaps a litmus test of how that's going to work, is when we see the US, Canada and Mexico co-host a Men's World Cup. Then we'll get a real picture of the distances, because Australia is so far from everywhere. I think a collaborative bid with Asia would be useful, because Asia is much more accessible from everywhere in the world. So I think that would be a great idea. And perhaps with things like the Women's World Cup, and perhaps those events is a good test run for that. But certainly there's opportunity just to share more knowledge, and I hope that we do that in the future. Australia has a strong relationship of doing that with the Pacific, but the sports diplomacy mandate does look at Indo-Pacific. So I think it'd be great if we could do more with Indonesia.
Ibu Steph, terima kasih banyak atas kamu bisa datang dan bikin wawancara ini dengan kami, dan mudah-mudahan kita bisa bertemu dengan kamu di Jakarta atau di Indonesia segera, dan ya mudah-mudahan bisa jumpa lagi.
Absolute pleasure anytime, and hopefully we meet at a sporting tournament soon.
That's all we have for you in this episode. For more on Katalis, check us out on our website, ayachepa-katalis.org, or find us on social media. Thanks for listening. We look forward to your company on the next episode of the Katalis Podcast.